Two shots echoed through the marble lobby of the Grand Central Hotel on January the 6th, 1872. Jim Fisk, the most flamboyant financier in America, the man newspapers called the Barnum of Wall Street, tumbled down the grand staircase with bullets in his abdomen and arm. "For God's sake, will no one save me?" The shooter was his former business partner. The woman they were fighting over waited across town for news. Fisk would be dead by morning. He was 36 years old. Just 3 years earlier, he had nearly destroyed the American economy in a scheme to corner the gold markets. Now 20,000 New Yorkers would file past his coffin, the largest public viewing since Abraham Lincoln. The trials stretched across 3 years, produced a death sentence, overturned on appeal, and ended with the killer serving just 4 years for gunning down an unarmed man in a crowded hotel. In today's episode of Old Money Empires, we examine the Jim Fisk scandal, robber barons, mistresses, stock manipulation, and the murder that ripped the mask off the Golden Age. Jim Fisk operated his empire from a building that captured everything strange and contradictory about the man who owned it. The Grand Opera House at 23rd Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan served two purposes that should have been mutually exclusive. The upper floors housed the headquarters of the Erie Railroad, one of America's most vital transportation links, complete with a 7-story safe containing Fisk's cash and valuables. The ground floor hosted operettas, plays, and the gaudy theatrical spectacles Fisk adored. He had purchased the building in 1869 with his partner Jay Gould, and he immediately set about making it an extension of his personality. He installed a $1,000 marble and porcelain sink in his office. He maintained a standing account at Delmonico's, Manhattan's finest restaurant, for champagne and oysters delivered to his desk throughout the workday. One biographer noted that Fisk seemed divinely fashioned for the function of giving offense to people of taste. His parties scandalized respectable New York society. Contemporaries described them as of the kind that brought Rome to ruin. The city's old money elite despised him as vulgar, tasteless, a parvenu who flaunted his fortune without the slightest pretense of refinement. He was everything they believed wealth should not be: loud, gaudy, unapologetic. But New York's working class saw a different man entirely. Fisk provided charity to the poor. He supported labor causes. He presented himself as living proof that a man could rise from nothing to command millions, and he never let anyone forget his humble origins. He cultivated this populist image with the same theatrical instincts he brought to everything else, understanding that it offered a kind of protection no amount of social acceptance ever could. When the elite turned against him, the masses would remain loyal. His partner, Jay Gould, handled the quiet calculations behind their schemes. Fisk handled the noise, the spectacle, the public performance of wealth and power that made them famous. Together, they controlled the Erie Railroad, and they had seized it through methods that would define an entire era of financial piracy. His business ethics and his personal life operated on the same principle: take what you want and worry about consequences later. He had married Lucy Moore back in 1854, when he was 19 and she was 15. By the late 1860s, they had reached an arrangement that suited them both. Lucy lived in Boston with her female companion, Fanny Harrod, while Fisk kept a succession of mistresses in Manhattan. They remained close, vacationing together and corresponding regularly, but their marriage had evolved into something that defied Victorian convention. Fisk's current mistress occupied a townhouse on 23rd Street, adjacent to the Grand Opera House itself, He had installed a hidden passageway connecting her residence to his Erie Railroad offices, allowing him to visit without public observation. Her name was Josie Mansfield, and within 3 years, she would help bring about his violent end. James Fisk Jr. entered the world on April 1, 1835, in the rural hamlet of Pownell, Vermont, about as far from the marble halls of Wall Street as an American life could possibly begin. His father was an itinerant peddler who traveled the countryside selling goods from a wagon, and young Jim spent his childhood absorbing the rhythms of that transient existence. He inherited his father's gift for salesmanship and his appetite for risk, but none of his patience for the slow accumulation of modest profits. At 15, he ran away from home to join Van Amberg's mammoth circus and menagerie. The circus became his true education. Working whatever jobs the traveling show required, roustabout, ticket taker, barker, Fisk learned lessons no formal schooling could have provided. He learned how to create spectacle. He learned how to capture and hold an audience's attention. He learned how to sell people on whatever you happened to be offering, regardless of its actual value. These skills would prove more useful on Wall Street than any training in finance or accounting. After the circus, he cycled through jobs as waiter and peddler before landing a position as a traveling salesman for the Boston dry goods firm Jordan Marsh. His theatrical instincts and inexhaustible energy made him a star. He could sell anything to anyone, and he worked hours that exhausted men twice his age. The Civil War transformed him from a successful salesman into wealthy speculator. By 1861, Fisk had secured contracts selling textiles to the Union Army, legitimate business that provided steady profits and government connections. He supplemented this income with cotton smuggling across Confederate lines, operations that contemporaries euphemistically termed shrewd dealing. The combination built his initial capital. His most audacious wartime gambit came as the Confederacy collapsed. Upon learning of Petersburg's fall and the war's imminent end, Fisk dispatched an agent on a fast boat to London with specific instructions: short Confederate bonds before news of the surrender reached European markets. This intelligence coup yielded a fortune and established his reputation for seizing opportunities others missed. In 1866, flushed with wartime profits, Fisk arrived in New York and opened a brokerage firm backed by the notorious financier Daniel Drew. Drew was already a legend on Wall Street, a former cattle drover who had pioneered the art of stock manipulation and earned a reputation for betraying every partner he ever had. He recognized in young Fisk a kindred spirit, someone willing to do whatever circumstances required, unencumbered by ethical considerations or social niceties. Through Drew, Fisk met the man who would become his essential partner, Jay Gould. Where Fisk was theatrical and quotable, Gould was quiet and calculating. Where Fisk craved the spotlight, Gould preferred operating from shadows. They complemented each other perfectly, and their first major collaboration would pit them against the richest man in America. Cornelius Vanderbilt controlled more wealth than any other American when he set his sights on the Erie Railroad in 1866. The Erie connected New York City to the Great Lakes, making it one of the most strategically valuable transportation assets in the country. Vanderbilt, who had already consolidated control of the New York Central, wanted it badly. He assumed his fortune made the acquisition inevitable. Drew, Gould, and Fisk taught him otherwise. Vanderbilt began purchasing Erie shares on the open market, methodically accumulating stock with the expectation that sheer financial force would eventually deliver him a controlling stake. It was the straightforward approach of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through superior resources. The Erie trio responded with a maneuver that would become synonymous with Gilded Age corruption. They simply printed more stock. Through a scheme involving fraudulent convertible bonds, they flooded the market with 50,000 new shares, systematically diluting Vanderbilt's holdings no matter how much money he poured in. Every share he purchased was immediately offset by fresh paper rolling off their printing press. Fisk taunted reporters with characteristic bravado. "If this printing press don't break down, I'll be damned if I don't give the old hog all he wants of Erie." Vanderbilt spent $7 million trying to acquire control. The trio kept printing. When New York courts issued arrest warrants for stock fraud, Fisk, Gould, and Drew gathered $6 million in cash and fled across the Hudson River to Jersey City. They established headquarters at Taylor's Hotel, operating from beyond New York's legal jurisdiction while plotting their counteroffensive. That counteroffensive revealed how completely money had corrupted the political system. They paid New York state legislators $1 million to pass the Erie Bill on April 13, 1868, legislation that retroactively legalized their fraudulent stock issuance. The bill transformed what had been criminal securities fraud into perfectly legal corporate maneuvering with a single vote. Boss Tweed of Tammany Hall joined the Erie Railroad's board of directors, cementing the merger of corporate and political corruption. The settlement terms with Vanderbilt revealed how business operated at the highest levels of Gilded Age capitalism. Vanderbilt agreed to sell his Erie shares back to Gould and Fisk at inflated prices, receiving $4.5 million plus another $1 million in compensation for abandoning his takeover attempt. Drew was forced into retirement. Gould and Fisk now controlled the railroad outright. Funds that should have maintained bridges, tracks, and rolling stock were diverted to legal fees, bribes, and the partners' personal enrichment. The Erie earned the nickname the Scarlet Woman of Wall Street and would eventually collapse into bankruptcy. But not before Fisk and Gould attempted something even more audacious. The scheme to corner America's gold market began with a simple observation about agricultural economics. In 1869, currency remained unstable in the aftermath of the Civil War, and international trade still depended on gold-backed transactions. Fisk and Gould reasoned that artificially inflating gold prices would raise the value of American wheat, encouraging Western farmers to ship their grain eastward to seaports, via the Erie Railroad, of course. They would profit from the gold speculation itself, and their railroad would profit from the increased freight traffic. The plan required manipulation on a scale no private individuals had ever attempted. They began by cultivating access to the Grant administration. Abel Rathbone Corbin, President Grant's brother-in-law, proved receptive to their approaches. They also bribed Assistant Treasury General Daniel Butterfield with a substantial gift in exchange for advance intelligence on any government plans to sell gold from federal reserves. Fisk and Gould even met with President Grant personally, arguing that high gold prices would benefit American farmers, conveniently omitting their own massive gold purchases as the scheme's true purpose. For weeks, they quietly accumulated gold while their agents in Washington worked to prevent government intervention. On September 24, 1869, the conspiracy reached its catastrophic climax. As the gold room opened that Friday morning, prices began surging. Gold that had traded at $143 climbed to $150, then pushed toward $162 as Fisk's brokers kept buying. Fisk worked the floor personally, loudly purchasing gold and driving prices even higher. What he apparently did not know was that Gould had received advanced warning that the government was about to intervene. While Fisk kept buying, Gould was secretly liquidating his own positions. Betraying his partner to protect his fortune. Shortly after noon, the Treasury Department flooded the market with $4 million in government gold. Prices collapsed from $160 to $130 within minutes. Pandemonium erupted on the trading floor. The devastation radiated outward from Wall Street across the entire national economy. Foreign trade ground to a halt. Stock prices fell by 20%. Grain prices dropped by half, destroying the very farmers Fisk and Gould had claimed they wanted to help. Investors who had borrowed money to purchase gold faced total ruin, unable to repay their loans at the collapsed prices. The crisis disrupted economic activity for months. Gould escaped with his fortune intact. Fisk bore the full weight of public hatred. His continued buying during the collapse, whether from ignorance of Gould's betrayal or theatrical bravado, making him the face of Wall Street's predations. This was the man Josie Mansfield had attached herself to. Fabulously wealthy, publicly despised, and constrained by nothing except his own appetites. Josie Mansfield was born in Boston on December 15, 1847, the daughter of a journalist who would be killed during California's gold rush when she was 7 years old. She later claimed her stepfather had abused her. By the time she encountered Jim Fisk in the fall of 1867 at a Manhattan establishment of questionable reputation, she had tried and failed to build a career as an actress. She possessed, however, other assets she understood how to leverage. Fisk was instantly captivated. Mansfield played hard to get for 3 months before accepting his advances. A strategic delay that established her value and yielded spectacular returns. Within a year, Fisk had showered her with gifts that would total nearly $1 million in today's currency. An extensive wardrobe, jewelry, a townhouse on 23rd Street adjacent to his Grand Opera House, and regular payments of tens of thousands of dollars. The hidden passageway connecting their buildings allowed him to visit without public observation. The arrangement held for nearly 3 years. On New Year's Day 1870, Mansfield hosted a party at her townhouse. Fisk brought a guest, his friend and business partner, Edward Stokes. Stokes inhabited a different world than the self-made Fisk. Born in 1841 to a prominent and respectable family, he carried himself with the easy confidence of inherited social standing. He was educated, refined, and possessed the polish that Fisk, for all his millions, could never quite acquire. Within days of that party, Stokes began calling on Mansfield alone. An affair commenced that would prove fatal to everyone involved. When Fisk discovered the relationship, he confronted Mansfield directly. Her response displayed breathtaking audacity. "I don't see why we can't all three be friends." Fisk's answer, later published in the New York Herald, captured his anguish. "You can't run 2 engines on one track in contrary directions at the same time." The personal betrayal metastasized into financial and legal warfare. On January 4, 1871, Fisk charged Stokes with embezzling $50,000 from an oil refinery they jointly owned. He timed the arrest warrant to be served late at night, ensuring Stokes would spend the entire weekend in jail without opportunity for bail. Stokes retaliated by demanding $200,000 for his shares in the refinery. Then, he and Mansfield escalated to blackmail. They threatened to publish Fisk's intimate letters unless he paid $25,000 for their return. The legal battles consumed most of 1871, draining both men's resources and patience. On January 5, 1872, Stokes learned that Fisk had secured grand jury indictments against him and Mansfield for extortion. His options had narrowed to nothing. The following afternoon, he waited in the lobby of the Grand Central Hotel with a loaded Colt revolver. Jim Fisk entered the Grand Central Hotel around 4:30 on the afternoon of January the 6th, 1872. The hotel had opened just 18 months earlier as the largest in the United States, with 650 rooms spread across 8 stories of brick and marble. Fisk was visiting a family friend, a woman named Lillian Holmes, who was staying at the hotel. He had no idea Edward Stokes was waiting for him. As Fisk began climbing down the grand staircase, Stokes stepped forward from where he had been watching and fired twice. One bullet struck Fisk's abdomen. The second hit his left arm. Fisk collapsed on the stairs, crying out for help. Witnesses rushed to assist, while others seized Stokes as he attempted to flee. Fisk was carried to a room in the hotel where doctors examined his wounds. The abdominal injury was mortal. Nothing could be done. He survived long enough to give a deathbed deposition, identifying Stokes as his assailant with remarkable clarity. He described seeing the pistol flash, hearing the report, and feeling the bullets strike him. The statement took less than 2 minutes. He signed it with a shaking hand. Jim Fisk died the following morning, January the 7th, 1872. On January the 8th, his body lay in state at the Grand Opera House, the theater he had purchased, the building where he had run his railroad empire and entertained his mistress. Approximately 20,000 people filed past his open casket. The mourners were not Wall Street financiers or New York society figures. The elite who had scorned him in life did not appear to honor him in death. Instead, the crowds consisted of working-class New Yorkers, immigrants, and the poor whom Fisk had cultivated through charity and his carefully constructed populist image. The funeral procession that followed was the largest public display since Abraham Lincoln's funeral 7 years earlier. Edward Stokes faced 3 separate trials over the next 2 years. The first ended in a hung jury. The second produced a first-degree murder conviction and a death sentence, overturned on appeal because the judge had improperly instructed the jury on the requirements for providing intent to kill. The third trial, in October 1873, convicted Stokes of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 6 years at Sing Sing prison. He served 4. Upon release in 1876, Stokes rebuilt himself as a respectable hotelier in Manhattan. He died in 1901 at age 60, having outlived his victim by nearly 30 years and never expressing regrets. Josie Mansfield vanished from public view after the trials. She died in 1931 at 83, having outlived both men by decades. Mark Twain coined the term Gilded Age the year after Fisk's murder, an era glittering on the surface, corrupt underneath. The death of Jim Fisk had already proven the phrase accurate. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. Had you heard of Jim Fisk before this video? And does Black Friday change how you see the robber baron era? We look forward to hearing from you below, and thanks for joining us for another episode.